So this is a fantastic question, one that gets asked a lot, so I'll do my best to break it down for you. The Bible is intimidating. It's almost 2,000 pages, depending on your translation, and most people think they can just open up to the first page and start reading like any other book. You can, but there's a lot that happens in the beginning of this book. And that's because the Bible is 66 books put together, and they're split up into two different categories. The first half of the Bible is the Old Testament. That's the history of the Jewish people, all the way from creation in Genesis to the coming of Jesus Christ. The New Testament is from the birth of Jesus onward. So depending on where you want to start, this is how these books are broken down. So the Old Testament starts in Genesis, and Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, those 5 books is the law. That's called the Torah in the Jewish faith. And this is the beginning of time all the way through Moses taking the Israelites out of Egypt and then wandering through the desert, and God gives them 613 commandments. We know 10 of them as the 10 commandments, but he gives them 600 and something laws that they have to follow as they wander the desert. And those laws were then passed down all the way through Jesus' time, even today, as how to follow God. That all comes in the first 5 books of the Bible. After that, you get to the history. Israel is now a nation, and they start to come together, and they're out of the wilderness, and they have to start living as a society. And then you get Joshua and Judges, and you get some very, very rich, powerful stories in there. David and Goliath is in there. Daniel and the lion's den is in there. Samson is in there. This is the storybook portion of the Jewish history. Lots of powerful things happen in there. After the history, you get the wisdom, and these books are amazing and they're beautiful. Job and Proverbs and Psalms and Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes, and these are some of the most beautiful books in the Bible. There's poetry, there's music, there's wisdom. Read that whenever you want in any way because they're just beautiful books. And then you get to the prophets. The prophets is God talking to his people through people. And they would come and they would prophesy about things that were going to come. Things are going to happen in the near future and the far future. Ezekiel, Daniel, Isaiah, they're talking about the end of the world sometimes. They're talking about Jesus coming. Sometimes they're talking about next year sometimes. That's just God speaking through his people. The whole first half of the Bible, the way I describe it is like biblical Game of Thrones. It's a history book, and it's the history of how terrible life was without God. And that's the whole purpose for God giving the law and God giving his prophets, is trying to have relationship with his people. And over and over again, they sin, they fall away, their generation stop following God, and he's got to send another prophet or orchestrate something for them to get back onto the right track. And that happens for thousands of years. And then finally, Jesus comes. There's no more law, there's no more prophets, it's just Jesus. And that starts in the New Testament. The first 4 books of the Bible, of the New Testament, are the Gospels, and that's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And it's 4 different versions of the story of Jesus. All 4 of them tell the same story, starting with Jesus' birth, through his life, his teaching, his death, his resurrection, and his ascension back into heaven, told from 4 different perspectives. And the way that I illustrate that is, let's pretend that I go to the fair with 3 of my friends, and then we're told to write a story about our night at the fair. So we all go for a few hours, we come back, we write down what we did and saw. All 4 of us are going to focus on different things. I might focus on the rides, and another friend might be focused on the games, another one on the food, another one on the atmosphere and the crowds. And you're going to get the same story overall, but you're going to get 4 different perspectives of the same story. So start with any one of those is my recommendation. Start with a gospel, because the whole Bible centers around Jesus. Picture a wheel, and around the outside of the wheel are all the books of the Bible, and in the center is Jesus. Just like he's in the center of the Bible itself, he's the reason for the book, he's the reason for life. Start with him, because now once you've read the story of Jesus, now you can go back to the beginning. You can read about how everything started and how everything fell apart, or you can go forward from there, because after John comes Acts. And Acts is the story of the disciples and the apostles after Jesus left and how they started the first church. And it was kind of rocky. They had to get off to a rocky start because people were trying to kill them. After Jesus rose from the dead and ascended and Christianity took off, they tried to control it. And they put people out there like this man named Saul, who went out and was tasked with killing Christians. Anybody that believed in Jesus, his job was to go and hunt them down, kick down doors, and murder these people that believed in Jesus. One day, Saul is going down a road, and Jesus himself appears to him and says, "Stop what you're doing. You're not doing this anymore." And he changes his heart, and Saul starts going by a different name. He starts going by Paul. And he then becomes one of the greatest preachers of the early church. After killing Christians, he turns around and now starts preaching to them. And he was able to preach to not just Jews, but Gentiles, which is what non-Jewish people were called. And Paul, as you can see over here, then wrote most of the New Testament. All of Paul's letters were letters that he wrote to churches at the time that had just gotten off the ground. So when you see Romans, the book of Romans is Paul writing to the church in Rome, saying, hey, here's how you follow Christianity for you Romans. And then you get to 1st and 2nd Corinthians. That's the church in Corinth. He wrote 2 letters to them saying, here's how you live a Christian life. Here's how you follow God's word. And then the church in Galatia and Ephesus and Philippi, and on it goes. And then he gets to Timothy. He wrote letters to a man named Timothy who he had he kind of helped him grow into a pastor of his own. He was a prodigy of Paul. He writes to him about how to be a good steward and pastor and godly man, and same thing with Titus. So all of Paul's letters are beautiful because it's how do you live now that Christ has come? How do you live a Christian life? What's the standard here that we have to abide by? And over and over again, Paul repeats himself a lot, but also gives a lot of different things to different churches depending on what they were dealing with. The letters of Paul is how to live a godly life. Then you get to the general letters, more of the same. These are from Peter and John, who walked with Jesus, and James, his brother. They're writing the same thing to people, to churches, but these are people that walked and talked with Jesus Christ himself, now teaching you how to live by his words. Beautiful stuff. The last book of the Bible, Revelation, that's a trip. I'll be honest. If you're going to start the Bible, do not start with that book. It goes off the rails quick with its imagery and its apocalyptic writing. You'll get lost, but it's kind of like Fantasia. Picture biblical Fantasia. What is going on? This is weird. It's all kinds of stuff. I'm not sure what's happening. That's Revelation. You can get to there eventually, but I would definitely not start there. But my personal recommendation, start with the Gospels. Start with Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. I have my favorite out of the 4, but all 4 are beautifully written. And I think too many people, Christians and non-Christians alike, they only know Jesus' birth because Christmas, and they only know Jesus' death because Easter. Not many people know what he said, why he came, what he did, what his purpose was, what the words of his own mouth were. And in most Bibles, everything Jesus said is in red. So it's very clear what Jesus himself said. I would dive into those first. Get to know who Jesus was when he was on this earth, what he did, what he said. Once you learn why he came and what he did, and then you have the power of the passion of Christ and you understand it and you've seen it, then you can go either way. You can go from there and you can start at the very beginning and read about why Jesus had to come, the purpose of creation and the sin that came into the world, and why everything goes off the rails since then, and why he had to come on this earth and essentially start over. Or you can go forward from there. What happened once Jesus left? How did the church start? And how do I live as a godly person, man, woman, Christian? That's all in Paul's letters and the general letters after Jesus left. But read wherever you want. Start with the Gospels, and then once you get your bearings there, you can go to anywhere on the wheel that you want, pick it up and read. Because remember, they're all individual books. It's not like you have to read them in a certain order. You can go read Genesis and then jump to Judges and then go to Hebrews and then go back to Acts. You can go all over the place because they're all individual books put together. They are relatively in order, but you can read them in any order that you want. So I hope that helps.